Some men see the storm coming. Others feel it in their bones. I smelled mine on my wife's skin. My name's Hunter Norris. I'm 48, run a small auto shop in Willow Creek, Texas. Spent the first half of my life making bad choices, spent the second half fixing them. I work hard, keep my head down, and don't complain. Life's simple. Engines don't lie, and neither do the men who know how to fix them. Joey, my lead mechanic, was finishing up a brake job when I walked in that morning. "You look like hell." I grabbed a rag, wiped the grease off my hands. "Thanks. Just what I needed." He chuckled, tossing a wrench onto the workbench. "Still sleeping on the couch?" I didn't answer. He knew. Everybody in town knew. Small-town gossip traveled faster than a Chevy with a blown muffler. Eliza had been distant, but lately, it was worse. Late nights, phone calls that stopped when I walked into the room, a different kind of quiet between us. Not the comfortable kind. The guilty kind. I wasn't the type to snoop, but when a man's got history like mine, he learns to trust his instincts. And mine told me something was off. Lena Foster confirmed it. She was the kind of girl who made trouble look easy, slim, sharp-eyed, always in some band t-shirt that was 2 sizes too small. She ran the bar at Hank's Tavern, a rundown joint off Main Street where half the town got their drinks and the other half got their secrets spilled. I was nursing a whiskey when she leaned against the counter. "You ever think about getting a new tattoo?" I glanced up. "Why?" She smirked, flicking the rag over her shoulder. "Because your wife sure has." The air in the room changed. The kind of shift a man feels in his chest before a punch lands. I set my glass down. "You gonna say what you mean? Or do I gotta drag it out of you?" Lena didn't look away. "She's been at Dawson's Inc. a lot. With Matthew." I exhaled slowly. Matthew Graham. The tattoo artist. Slender, quiet, always dressed in black. The type that looked like he wrote poetry about rain and heartbreak. He'd come through town a few years back, opened up shop, and made a name for himself. Lena watched me. "I'm not saying it's what you think, but, it's exactly what I think." I cut in. She shrugged. "I figured you'd want to hear it from someone who ain't trying to humiliate you." I nodded, slid a 20 across the bar, and stood. "Appreciate it." My boots hit the pavement harder than usual as I stepped outside. The night air was thick, smelling like rain and hot asphalt. I lit a cigarette and stared down the street. Dawson's Inc. was only a couple of blocks away. I could go there now. Kick the door open. Handle it the way my old self would have. But I wasn't that man anymore. Didn't mean I wasn't going to handle it. Just meant I was going to do it right. I took my time finishing the cigarette, letting the burn settle in my chest before flicking the butt onto the curb. My hands weren't shaking. That part of me was long gone. Instead, a cold clarity settled in. I'd been here before, in another life, with different faces and different betrayals. A man learns from his past, or he drowns in it. I drove home, headlights cutting through the darkness. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, the kind of stillness that meant Eliza wasn't back yet. A glance at the clock, 11:42 p.m. She'd told me dinner with the girls would wrap up around 9. Guess the conversation had gotten real deep. I didn't wait up. Didn't ask questions I already knew the answers to. Instead, I went to the garage, pulled a beer from the fridge, and started working on an old carburetor I'd been meaning to rebuild. Nothing like grease and cold metal to keep a man's head straight. I heard her coming an hour later. The quiet shuffle of shoes coming off by the door. The careful way she moved, like she didn't want to wake me. I kept working, listening. The pause before she walked into the kitchen. The soft clatter of her setting her purse down. "Hunter." Her voice had that tired, careful tone. The one women use when they're trying to figure out what version of their husband they're walking into. I kept my focus on the carburetor. "Yeah, I didn't want to wake you." "You didn't." A beat of silence. "You're still working?" I tightened a bolt, wiped my hands on a rag. Seemed like a good night for it. Another pause. "Long night at the bar?" She was feeling me out. I let the question hang, then met her eyes. "No longer than yours." That landed. Just for a second. Just enough for her eyes to flick away, for her hand to tighten on the counter. She forced a smile. "I told you, we just lost track of time." I nodded, took a sip of beer, let the weight of the silence settle. "Yeah," I said. "That happens." She lingered, like she wanted to say something else. I didn't give her the space to. Just went back to my work, and after a moment, she turned and walked out. I didn't follow. The next morning, I moved early. Eliza was in the shower when I went through her car. I'd done enough dirty work in my life to know how to search without leaving a trace. Didn't take long. A crumpled receipt from Dawson's Inc., time-stamped from a week ago. Cash. No name on it, but a note scribbled on the back in a handwriting that wasn't hers. Next time, my treat. I slid it back where I found it. No reason to tip her off. At the shop, I kept busy. Put my head down, fixed what was broken, gave people what they paid for. But under the hood, my mind was turning. Matthew Graham. A man who made his living putting permanent marks on people's skin. Time to make sure he left this town with a mark of his own. At lunch, I stopped by Mitchell's Auto, a small garage on the edge of town run by Gus Mitchell. A guy I trusted. The kind of man who never screwed a customer, never held back his opinion. He wiped his hands on a rag as I walked in. Hunter. Gus. He studied me, then nodded toward the shop. Truck giving you trouble? Nah. Just needed a quick word. He tossed the rag onto a workbench. I'm listening. I leaned against the counter. Matthew Graham. You know him. Gus's face barely changed, but I caught the flicker in his eyes. Enough. He ever bring his car in? He let out a low breath. Few times. Don't think he knows much about cars. Either that or he's lazy. Last time you saw it? Last week. But it wasn't him dropping it off. It was Eliza. There it was. No shock, no anger, just confirmation. I nodded. Appreciate it. Gus gave me a long look, then sighed. You need anything? I met his eyes. Not yet. That night, I made sure Eliza saw me looking at my arm in the mirror, tracing the faded ink from a lifetime ago. Made sure she saw me flipping through my old tattoo sketches, the ones I hadn't touched in years. Thinking of getting something new? She asked, careful. Maybe. I turned a page, acting like I wasn't watching her reaction. Been a long time. She forced a smile. I always liked your tattoos. That was a lie. Years ago, she told me they made me look like I hadn't moved on from my past. Guess she liked them just fine when they were on Matthew. I closed the book, stretched my arms. Might stop by Dawson's Ink tomorrow. See what they can do. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. She wouldn't sleep well that night. I made sure of it. The next morning, I played it cool. Drank my coffee, read the paper, let Eliza sit across from me in the kitchen like she wasn't twisting herself into knots. She kept glancing up, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. Just took my time, finished my eggs, grabbed my keys. Where you headed? She asked. Dawson's Ink. I didn't have to look up to know I had her full attention now. She kept her voice steady, but I heard the edge under it. You never mentioned what you wanted to get. I shrugged. Haven't decided. She set her coffee down. Maybe think it over more. It's permanent, you know. I finally looked at her. Yeah, that's the point. I let that hang for a second, watching the way she forced herself to hold eye contact. Then I grabbed my jacket and walked out. Dawson's Ink sat on the corner of Main and Ash, a small, dark shop with a neon sign buzzing in the window. I stepped inside, the smell of ink and antiseptic thick in the air. A young girl at the counter barely looked up from her phone. You got time for a walk-in? I asked. She popped her gum. Depends on what you want. I'll talk to Matthew. She hesitated, then thumbed toward the back. He's with a client. Should be done soon. I took a slow look around, noting the framed flash sheets on the walls, the smell of burnt coffee from a pot that had been sitting too long. Then the door in the back cracked open, and Matthew Graham stepped out, rolling his shoulders like he'd been hunched over for hours. He was exactly what I expected. Tall, lean, arms covered in ink that meant something to him and nothing to anybody else. He ran a hand through his shaggy dark hair and barely glanced up before spotting me. His posture changed fast. I smiled. Got a minute? His jaw worked, but he nodded, leading me to a chair near the back. The place was quiet, the hum of a tattoo gun the only sound. He sat on his stool, arms crossed, waiting. I let the silence stretch. Finally, he exhaled. Look, man. I held up a hand. No, you don't get to talk first. His mouth shut. I leaned back, let my hands rest on my thighs, kept my voice even. You know who I am. You know who she is. And you know damn well what you've been doing. He swallowed, but I gave him credit. He didn't look away. Didn't run. I never meant to it. I laughed. Just once. Yeah, you did. His fingers drummed against his knee. It just happened. That's so. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Tell me, Matthew, did it just happen before or after you put your hands on my wife? His throat bobbed. It's not like that. I tilted my head. Explain it to me, then. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like that. His eyes darted to the front, like he was checking for witnesses. Smart. You want to keep lying? I asked. Or you want to get honest before I make things real inconvenient for you? He sat up straighter, running a hand over his mouth. Look, I didn't go looking for it, okay? She wasn't happy. I nodded. And that was your problem to fix? No. I leaned in. But you sure as hell tried, didn't you? He blinked, and I saw it then, the shift. The moment he realized there was no walking this back. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't throwing punches. I was just laying it all out, clear and cold. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he muttered. I smiled again, slow and sharp. That's the funny thing about consequences. They don't give a damn what you meant. He exhaled, pressing a hand to the back of his neck. What do you want? I stood, cracked my knuckles. You're going to tell her it's over. He blinked. What? You heard me. I took a step closer. You're going to tell her you made a mistake. That you regret it. That it never meant a damn thing. His face twisted. That's not. I leaned in until my voice was low enough for only him to hear. Or I ruin you. He stared at me, breathing hard. How? I chuckled. Come on, Matthew. You really think you're the only one with secrets? His face went pale. I clapped a hand on his shoulder, squeezed just enough to make my point. You've got till tonight. Make it convincing. Then I walked out, leaving the door open behind me. And just like that, the game had begun. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I took a drive. Let the road unwind beneath my tires. Let the hum of the engine keep my thoughts steady. There was a time I would have handled this differently. Old Hunter would have put Matthew's head through a wall, let his fists do the talking, let the rage dictate the terms. But I wasn't that man anymore. Didn't mean I'd gone soft. Just meant I knew how to make a man bleed without throwing a punch. By the time I pulled back into town, the sun was sinking low. Willow Creek looked like every other small town at dusk. Families finishing dinner, porch lights flickering on, the last stragglers closing up shop. I parked outside Hank's Tavern and stepped inside, the familiar scent of old wood and spilled beer settling around me. Lena was behind the bar, cutting limes. She glanced up as I slid onto a stool. You look like you had a productive day. I smirked. Let's just say Matthew and I had a chat. She tossed a lime wedge into a bin. He's still breathing? For now. I grabbed a peanut from the bowl and cracked the shell. But he'll be making some changes real soon. She leaned on the bar. Like breaking things off with Eliza before I make his life a whole lot worse. Lena's brow lifted. That all? I popped the peanut into my mouth, chewed slow. For now. She studied me. You sure that's enough? I met her eyes. Trust me. She nodded once, but I caught the flicker of something in her expression. Admiration? Maybe. Caution? Definitely. She'd seen plenty of men lose their heads over a cheating wife, but she knew me. Knew I wasn't the kind to play the fool or lick my wounds. I finished my drink and headed home. The house was dark when I stepped inside, the only light coming from the lamp in the living room. Eliza was on the couch, legs curled under her, phone in hand. When she saw me, she straightened, like she'd been waiting. You were out late, she said, voice careful. I shrugged out of my jacket, hung it on the hook. Had things to do. She hesitated. You go to the shop? I nodded. Stopped by. She chewed her lip, setting her phone down. Hunter, Her phone buzzed. She flinched. I didn't even have to look. I knew who it was. She picked it up like it was a loaded gun. Read the message. And just like that, her face changed. Her shoulders sagged. Her fingers tightened around the screen. I watched silent. Let her sit in it. Let her feel it. She finally looked up. I think we should talk. I pulled up a chair, leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees. Yeah, I said. We should. The silence between us stretched. She shifted, rubbed at the back of her neck. I never meant. I held up a hand. Don't. Her mouth shut. I let the weight of it settle. You want me to sit here and listen while you spin some story about how it just happened? That you didn't mean to hurt me? That you felt alone? Unappreciated. She swallowed. I leaned forward. I could have forgiven a mistake. A one-time thing. But this? I shook my head. This was a choice. Over and over again. Her eyes glistened. Hunter, please. I didn't blink. You feel guilty, Eliza? You want absolution? Wrong man for that. Her breath hitched. I didn't want to fall for him. I chuckled, shaking my head. You didn't fall for him, Eliza. You fell for the way he made you feel. You fell for the attention, the excitement, the idea of something different. She bit her lip, and for a second, I saw it, that flicker of realization. The truth she hadn't wanted to say out loud. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. You think you love him? Her lips parted, closed again. I nodded. Then you should go to him. Her brows pulled together. What? I stood, towering over her. If he's what you want, go. Pack your bags. Walk out that door. But if you think, for 1 second, I'm gonna sit here and let you string me along while you make up your mind, you've got another thing coming. Tears welled in her eyes. Hunter. I grabbed my keys, turned for the door. Paused just long enough to glance over my shoulder. You made your bed. Time to lie in it. Then I walked out, letting the door click shut behind me. I didn't go far. Just far enough. Hank's Tavern was quiet that time of night, the regulars thinning out, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of country music from the jukebox. I took my usual seat, nodding at Lena as she slid a whiskey across the bar without asking. She leaned on her elbows, studying me. She take the bait? I swirled the glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. Hook, line, and sinker. Lena smirked, wiping down the counter. She's probably pacing the floor right now, trying to figure out if she should pack her bags or beg you to stay. She's got till morning to decide. Lena arched a brow. And if she picks him? I knocked back the whiskey, let it burn. Then she gets everything that comes with that choice. Lena didn't push. She didn't need to. We both knew Matthew wasn't the man Eliza thought he was. He built a nice little fantasy for her, all soft words and stolen moments, but when it came time to stand in the daylight, men like him folded. I took my time finishing my drink, letting the weight in my chest settle. Then I stood, slid a 20 across the bar, and nodded at her. I'll be seeing you. She tapped the rim of her glass with her fingernail. Bet you will. I drove slow on the way home, letting the dark stretch out ahead of me. The house was lit up like she thought keeping the lights on would keep the truth out. I stepped inside, and there she was, sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a half-empty mug of coffee, like caffeine was gonna fix what she'd broken. She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. You left. You noticed. She swallowed. I wasn't sure you'd come back. I shrugged, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. Didn't think I needed to be here to watch you make up your mind. Her fingers tightened around the mug. I didn't sleep. I twisted off the cap, took a drink. Not my problem. She flinched. Hunter, I held up a hand, stopping whatever excuse she was about to choke on. One question. That's all I got for you. She nodded, hesitant. Okay. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You staying or going? Silence. She looked at the table, at her hands, at the clock on the wall. Everywhere but at me. I exhaled through my nose. That's what I thought. Her breath hitched. It's not that simple. No, Eliza. My voice was steady, cold. It's exactly that simple. You either want this marriage or you don't. You either take responsibility or you don't. I pushed off the counter, tossing the water bottle onto the table in front of her. I'm not a second choice. I'm not a backup plan. And I sure as hell ain't waiting around while you figure out if you can have it both ways. She wiped at her face, took a shaky breath. I never meant to hurt you. I let out a humorless laugh. That line work on Matthew? Her shoulders tensed. I grabbed my jacket. I'll make it easier for you. Her head snapped up. Hunter, wait. I ignored her, walked down the hall, and into our bedroom. The closet door was open, a half-packed suitcase sitting on the bed, clothes spilling out of it like she'd started and stopped 100 times. I grabbed it, zipped it shut, and hauled it into the living room, dropping it at her feet. There, I said. Now you don't have to think about it. Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but I was done with that game. She'd had her chance. I stepped back, ran a hand over my jaw. Take it and go. She didn't move. I nodded. Or don't. Either way, I'm done. Then I turned and walked out, leaving her with nothing but her choices. I spent the night at the shop. Wasn't the first time. Probably wouldn't be the last. I had an old cot in the back, stiff as hell, but better than a bed that didn't feel like mine anymore. The air smelled like oil and metal, familiar, steady. I cracked a beer, sat on my workbench, and let the silence settle. Joey showed up early, whistling as he pushed the shop door open. He paused when he saw me, eyebrows raising. Long night? I took a sip of my beer. Something like that. He eyed the empty bottle next to me. Want me to run out? Get coffee? Already got some. I gestured to the dented thermos on the bench. He nodded, grabbed a rag, and started wiping down his toolbox. She leave? I took my time answering. She's got her bags. That's not an answer. I exhaled through my nose. She's still in the house. For now. He let out a low whistle. Messy. I shrugged. She made the mess. Not my job to clean it up. Joey tossed the rag over his shoulder. What's next? I drained the rest of my beer, set the bottle down with a clink. Moving forward. By noon, word was already spreading. Small towns don't wait for the ink to dry. Lena sent me a text. She showed up at Matthew's. Didn't look happy. I smirked. Didn't reply. Instead, I got back to work. Pulled an engine, rebuilt a transmission, let the sweat do what whiskey couldn't. The day moved fast, and by evening, the shop was quiet again. That's when the knock came. I wiped my hands on a rag, walked to the door. When I opened it, Eliza stood there, arms crossed, shoulders tight. Her eyes searched mine. He told me. I leaned against the doorframe, let the weight of the moment settle. Good. She looked past me, into the shop, like she was expecting something more. That's it. I folded my arms. What else do you want? Her breath hitched. I don't know. I shook my head. That's the problem, Eliza. You never did. She swallowed hard. I cut her off. Yeah, you thought. Silence stretched between us. She shifted on her feet, biting the inside of her cheek. I made a mistake. I nodded. No argument there. Her voice cracked. Do you hate me? I considered that. Really let the question settle. Then I shook my head. No, but I don't love you either. The truth hit her harder than anything else could have. She sucked in a breath, blinking fast. I should go. I didn't stop her. She turned, walked back to her car, hesitated for a second, like she was waiting for me to call her back. I didn't. The taillights disappeared down the road, and just like that, it was over. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and poured myself a drink. Tomorrow, I'd call a lawyer. Get the papers drawn up. Make it official. Tonight, I'd sit in the quiet and let the past go. 2 months later, the ink was dry, and the house was mine again. I had the locks changed, repainted the walls, and ripped out the bedroom carpet like it held the ghosts of bad choices. Work stayed steady, the shop busier than ever. Word had gotten around, and somehow, my name carried more weight than before. Men shook my hand a little firmer, clapped me on the back like I'd come back from war. Maybe I had. Eliza left town. Didn't even say goodbye. She tried to reach out once, some half-assed text about closure. I deleted it without reading past the first line. She was someone else's problem now, maybe not even Matthew's. Last I heard, his shop wasn't doing too well. Turns out, being the guy who screws another man's wife doesn't do much for your reputation. People stopped booking appointments. His lease ran out. He packed up and left before the ink on my divorce papers had dried. I never saw either of them again. One night, I was closing up when I heard a voice behind me. Still working too damn late, I see. I turned and found Leah standing by the garage door, arms crossed, smirking. My daughter. She was taller than the last time I'd seen her, carrying herself with more weight, more confidence. Same sharp eyes, same stubborn jaw. I wiped my hands on a rag. Didn't think I'd see you again. She shrugged. I didn't think I'd want to. Fair enough. I leaned against the workbench. What changed? She kicked at a loose bolt on the ground. Mom told me what happened. I nodded, waiting. She said you didn't fight for her, she said. I let out a short laugh. That what she calls it? Leah smirked. Yeah, but I figured it out pretty quick. I tilted my head. What's that? She met my eyes, steady. You didn't fight for her because you weren't supposed to. Smart kid. I nodded. That about sums it up. She exhaled, hands in her jacket pockets. She wants me to move with her. Start fresh. New place, new people. I swallowed, keeping my face neutral. And she rocked back on her heels. And I told her I'm staying. I didn't say anything, just let the words settle. She gave me a look. You gonna say something, or you just gonna stand there? I smirked. Glad to know you got your old man's stubborn streak. She rolled her eyes, but there was something softer in them now. Yeah. I tossed my keys onto the workbench. You eat yet? She hesitated, then shook her head. Come on, I said, nodding toward the door. I know a place. We locked up, walked to my truck, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it. The weight lifting, the road stretching out ahead, clean and wide. Some men break. Some men build. I knew which one I was.